Hello whisky fans, I've been thinking a lot lately about all the truly wonderful bottles of whisky that I've had over the years. All of the bottles of whisky that you can't get anymore, or they're not quite the same as they used to be. And it's such a shame that whisky, as with all things, comes and goes, it changes, it evolves. But I've been putting some thought lately into what you can do to make those truly great whiskies last a little bit longer. And one thing that you can do is start your own infinity bottle. Now, the infinity bottle, as far as I can tell from my research, may have been invented by a little known whisky tuber from the Isle of Man. You may have heard of him. His name's Ralphie Mitchell. And what the infinity bottle is, the idea is that you get an empty bottle, and it's a whisky that you create by blending at home. So every time you finish a bottle of whisky, you take traditionally the last dram and you tip it into your infinity bottle, and when it gets all the way full, you take a dram out and drink it every time you put a new dram in. Now, the infinity bottle idea, it's got several names. Some people call it a solera bottle, and that's for good reason. The solera system is something that's practiced on the Iberian Peninsula by sherry vineyards or bodegas, and what they would do, they would line up a series of casks, usually 3 high, just like in a Dunwich warehouse, and they'd get their new batch of wine or sherry, or some people do it with beer or even vinegars, lots of different things. But in Iberia, they would take their new wine and tip it into the top line of casks, and they'd leave that in there for a set period of time. And once they were happy that it was sufficiently aged, they would rack some of that into the middle line, so using gravity to go into the next line of casks down, and they would replace what was taken from that top line of casks with some more new wine, and they'd leave it for a little bit longer and rack a certain percentage of what was in that middle line into the lower line, and so on, constantly replenishing with new wine at the top. So you would eventually end up with 3 different vintages, almost multi-year vintages on each different line, always with the oldest wine in the bottom line of casks. And obviously, if you do a sufficiently good job of tending to your solera system, making sure that you're topping up with new wine at the top and not selling too much, the average age across all of the casks eventually creeps up. Now, there's several reasons why they do this in the sherry and wine and several other industries, and it's mainly to present a pleasing and economical spread of youth and good age, and also to even out any of the slightly undesirable rogue casks, so that you're offering a repeatable, high-quality style that's the same every time a customer buys a bottle. So exactly the same process applies to when we create an infinity bottle or a solera bottle in Scotch. And the one that everyone at home is going to be shouting out is Glenfiddich. They actually have a large vat which they use as a solera system, constantly taking some whisky out and topping it up with new spirit. And that's been in operation since 1998. So in theory, if you buy a bottle of the Glenfiddich Solera now, it could contain a very small percentage of 23-year-old whisky. So what I've done to preserve some of those wonderful old whiskies that I'm getting down to the final dregs, I've got myself a couple of empty whisky bottles here. So I bet a lot of you can tell me what that one is. I'm not going to show you the stopper because that's going to give it away a little bit. But that's a very unique shape, isn't it? Lovely bottle, which is why I've chosen it for my infinity bottle. Any of you think you can guess what was originally in that? Because I've obviously stripped the label off now. Let me know in the comments. This one might give you a little bit more of a problem. I think this is a whisky that I've actually recorded a review, but I've not got around to uploading it yet, so that's a real red herring for you. But if anyone thinks they know, and there's probably several whiskies that are available in this one, but if anyone can guess what was in this one, then I'll be very impressed with that. And you might be able to see that there is a little bit of whisky in the bottom there, and that's not the last dram from this bottle, and I haven't started already. That is actually because these bottles have been laying around empty for a while. Especially this one, the cork was really loose, so what I've done, and also it was a bit funky, didn't smell great inside this bottle, so I'll put a little bit of shall we say a convenient solvent cleaner that I had laying around into that bottle, just to clean it out and to freshen it up a bit. and I've had it upside down for a few hours just to get that cork to swell up again. That's much better seal there than it was a few days ago. So I'm just going to discard off my used whiskey solvent there. Find a use for that later, possibly. No funk left in there. I'll probably throw that away actually, because they were a bit grim inside and I don't really want to drink that. Yep, much better. So what are the rules when it comes to creating your own infinity bottle? Well, the short answer is there are absolutely none, because it's your whiskey and you can make whatever you want to. But I will say that it's a really good idea to decide early on what your vision, what your intentions are for your infinity bottle. Now, the obvious one is peat. If you get an infinity bottle that's all really good, unpeated, really subtle, delicate whiskies, and you tip some Ardbeg 10 in there, that's going to drastically change the flavour profile. And that might be what you want. You might be feeling ambitious. You might think that you're capable of taking some peated and unpeated whiskey and blending them together into something that works harmoniously. Me personally, I think that I stand a better chance of getting something good if I keep the two separated, and that's why I've got the two bottles. I'm going to go for peated whiskey in the square bottle and the unpeated whiskey in this one here. Another thing that you probably want to decide before you get too carried away is what whiskey are you going to put in your infinity bottle. So that depends on which categories of whiskey you want to include. So do you want to put blended whiskey in there? Do you want it to just be Scotch, or is it absolutely everything? Are you going to have a minimum ABV? Because if you're like me and you don't like your whiskies on the 40% side, then you might want to make a rule that you're going to stick to 46 and above, or 43 and above, or even only cask strength whiskies. If Japanese whiskey is really your thing, then you might want to make an exclusively Japanese infinity bottle. That's assuming that the Japanese distilleries haven't put any Scotch in there already for you. Another thing that you might want to consider is, do you want to start with a fairly neutral, middle-of-the-road base for your infinity bottle? Now, this is something that a lot of independent blenders do when they're making their whiskies. Quite often, if it's bottom shelf product, they will start off with grain whiskey, or if not, they might start off with something fairly neutral, something maybe bourbon matured, something quite light, something a little bit young to keep costs down perhaps. But one thing you need to be aware of is that once you've got 20 or 30 whiskies in there, if they're all sort of prima donna whiskies, they're all going to be shouting over each other, it might be easier to not get something that's overly muddy if you start off with a fairly neutral base. So something like maybe a light Speyside, maybe a young Glenlivet or a Glen Murray, maybe Crabby's Yardhead, something like that. Or the alternative approach to all of these things is to go for the pure chaos method, and I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick to peated and unpeated, but I'm going to take a dram from every bottle that I finish, providing that I like it. So obviously if it's something that I really hate, that won't go in, but if it's a whiskey that I like and it's peated, in it goes. If it's an unpeated whiskey that I like, in it goes. Now, I have heard of some other people being very careful about their infinity bottles. Some people have had them going for a very long time and they get very attached to them. And something that you can do, if you want to be really careful and not completely balls it up, is every time you get a new whiskey that you want to put in, you can get a graduated measure, so either something like this, or probably more likely you'll want something precise and accurate, something like this. And you decant some of your infinity bottle as it is into the measure, and you put the corresponding proportion of the new whiskey in, let it marry for a little bit, and then try it to see if you like the new addition. If you don't, you give it a miss. If you do, in it goes. Must admit, I can't be bothered to do that. I'm just going to go for it, because my vision for these two infinity bottles is that I want them to be a barometer for the whiskey industry. I want them to record the state of the whiskey industry as it is. I want it to be sort of a bit of a Dorian Gray living representation of what's going on. And over the years that's going to change, and sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it'll probably be not so good. Now, if you do really mess up, what do you do about that? If it's really quite uncomfortable to drink, then an absolute last resort, I would say you can probably drain maybe a third or a half of it and then top it up with something a bit more pleasant, maybe something a little bit more neutral. That can be a good way to reset your infinity bottle if you do feel like you've really taken a wrong turn. It's either that or you just keep going, keep taking one out as you put one in, and persevere and hope that it gets better. So it really is whatever you want to do, and I think that's what makes it such a fun idea, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this goes. Now, I am thinking that the peated one will probably, I don't know, maybe be dominated by things like Ardbeg and Laphroaig. For a start, I buy a lot of those heavily peated whiskies anyway, so there's probably going to be a lot of that goes in there. Whether you're going to be able to taste anything else, or whether those whiskies will mix with something else and create entirely new flavours that weren't in either one, it's going to be really fun to find out. So let's have a look to see what I've got, to see what we can start off with. Now, I think this one is going to be a fantastic whisky to start off with in the unpeated whisky, because it is a real, well, the distillery, Tamnavulin, started off as a real blend filler. So this is a whisky it's a distillery that's built its whole purpose around unoffensive, pleasant, middle of the road. Pleasant really is the right word. It's the Tamnavulin double cask. So I'm going to get my measure. I'm going to go for 50ml measures. I might change that to 30ml measures later on, depending on how quickly they fill up. See how it goes. And something that I do really recommend, if you don't want to make an absolute mess, just get yourself a cheap plastic funnel, eBay, pound shop, whatever. So here we go, Tamnavulin double cask. Let's get a double measure. In it goes. Dram number 1. So what else have we got for the unpeated? This is another good one. A little bit of a spoiler here. I've just realised I've done something silly with regards to something I said earlier in this video. So that's given it away quite a bit. Bladnoch. It's not the Bladnoch 10-year-old. The bottle for that is somewhere else. But this is the Bladnoch Vinea. So I think this is going to be another really good one. Because Bladnoch is another, in a completely positive way, it's a little bit of a middle of the road, inoffensive. It's not going to cover too many other things up. I think it's going to work really well with the other whiskies that we put in here. Bladnoch Vinea. I don't know if it's just my eyes playing tricks on me, but pouring that in there, that smells lovely. Pouring that in there, it looked more viscous than the Tamnavulin. So that's our second unpeated whisky. Have I got anything else for the unpeated? This will be another good one. Something that you'll hear when you talk to people in the industry about blending is a phrase called top dressing, and that's when you take a whisky that really shines and you add it to a whisky that needs that little bit of a boost. So quite often distilleries and blenders will top dress with something really special, either something that's really punchy and powerful or something that's got really quite a high age statement to just add a little bit of class. This one is one that I've reviewed but not uploaded the video yet because I'm really behind schedule. It's Ben Bracken, which is a Lidl product. So this is a White and Mackay whisky. In my opinion, it's probably also Tamnavulin, But this is Ben Bracken 28-year-old Speyside whiskey. I think that one's going to go really well in the infinity bottle. Oh, that's a bit close. Exactly 50 ml of that left. So it's lucky I didn't drink any more of that one. I have been saving these for quite a while because I've had this in mind. In we go. Now I think that's probably all I've got to hand right now out of my nearly finished unpeated whiskies. So I'll put the cork back in there. Looks a decent colour. What is that closest to? It's a little bit darker than the Bladnoch. It's probably it's a cross between the Tamnavulin and the Bladnoch probably. So those ones have gone into our unpeated infinity bottle. So have to do my best to leave that alone and not drink it before it's ready now. Let's have a look what peated stock we've got. Oh, that smells nice. Peated whiskies. Who's up next? Lefroy 10-year-old. So this is last year's bottling. Bottled in February 2020. 60.1%, so that's going to give a nice boost to the ABV. It's always tempting when you're doing an infinity bottle to add a little bit more of anything that you really like, because you know that it's going to do wonders for the blend in the short term. But I would advise not to do that, because you don't want to overpower your infinity bottle. You don't want it to become too much like any one thing. You want a real good blend. At least that's how I think it should be done. You're all different people. You can do it however you want. Lefroy 10-year-old. What else have we got? Now, deja vu here. This one looks a little bit like something I've already put in. It's the Ben Bracken 22-year-old Islay. So again, a little product by way of White & Mackay. What distillery is this? Well, I think it's got a very Lefroy-y profile to it. It's got that real, quite heavily peated for the age, 22 years. But it's also got that heavy bourbon, vanilla, caramel note. Either way, it's a very nice whiskey. Shame that it's at 40%, but that's another one that's going to go really well in my peated infinity bottle. And I've actually had these Ben Bracken since 2015. Probably opened them, I don't know, maybe nearly 2 years ago. So quite dusty ones. But I'm glad that I've still got them around to put in this. What's next for the peated infinity bottle? Now this is one that I'm kind of in two minds about, because when you're putting peated whiskey, or if you're splitting your infinity bottle between peated and unpeated, what do you do about those ones that are peated but not that peated? Highland Park, that's a very middle of the road peat. It's definitely nowhere near as strongly peated as the Lefroy, but 63.3%, because this is the cask strength release. I'm sure that that will add a nice bit of power and a nice bit of sherry and sweetness, hopefully a nice bit of complexity to the background of this. It's nice to get some representation from some peated distilleries that on Islay as well. So coming up next, this is another one that's not all that peaty. It's also one that regrettably has quite a low ABV. That's the Ardmore. So this is another distillery with a reasonably large output, but a lot of it has gone into blends. So a very different peat, but still quite nice. It's another one that I have reviewed, but I'm yet to release the video for. Quite a few of those. Ardmore Legacy, 40%. In you go. And last of all for now, I've saved this. You will see this when you see my video for the Ardmore. This is something really, well, special in a way. I'm adding this in for posterity's sake. It's a miniature that I've had half of in order to do the review, which again I haven't released yet, but it's a miniature of the Ardmore when it was still bottled at the proper 40% and non-chill filtered. So this is a real piece of whisky history. So whereas this one is still available in the shops now, this one has not been available for quite a long time, probably over 5 years I would guess. So by putting this into my peated infinity bottle, it allows that little bit of whisky history to live on. And the only problem is I've not got a full 50ml. Let's just see how much of this I have got. Well, that's 25. Still a little bit left there. Probably 35ml. So a little bit of a short measure on the Ardmore there. But what else can I do other than look for another one of these? Let's give it a quick sniff. Not actually sure about that one. So I said a couple of minutes ago that I was going to put these away and leave them till they're ready. But what's the fun in that? Let's get a glass. Let's get a glass and see what we've got. I don't know what's been in that one. Oh. Masala wine. That's not whiskey. I'm not using that one. That's a clean one. Right, let's try the unpeated. Just have a tiny little taste, see what we've got. So it's had a few minutes to mix together. Regrettably, there's a little bit of a cardboardy note to this. That's a little bit odd. You can smell there's quite a lot of fresh fruity sherry in there. Some nice graininess. What's that maltiness coming through from? Probably the Tamnavulin. Let's see how it tastes. I think you're getting a tiny little bit of the age coming through, especially on the finish and the late palate. You can taste some tea tannins, not bitter oakiness, but some more well-aged notes. That's interesting. If I bought this in a shop not knowing what it was, I would be very happy with it. But already it's sort of merging and taking bits and pieces from each whisky. I wouldn't say that it's come up with any new flavours, but it's a new experience on its own. Let's have a tiny bit of the peated one. A little bit more than that. Don't want to have too much. Don't want to spoil it. Cool. Now that's a really dirty, almost coal smoke peat. Really, really smoky. So that's not really something that's in any of these whiskies. Not in this style. But the peat has taken on quite a lot more of an industrial, sort of smoky, dirty quality. I would definitely say coal smoke. Let's see how it tastes. Okay, that one's really good. It's strange. You're getting lots of power coming through, which I can only think is the Lafroig. But this peatiness is almost something that I've never tasted before. And that's the beautiful fun of creating your own affinity bottle. Because already, I've only put 3 or 4 whiskies into each of these. But they're already whiskies that no one else in the world has, no one else in the world can ever have. Obviously you could copy what I've just done because I've told you and make yours at home, but even then the proportions won't be quite the same. And as I add more and more things to this, it's going to be completely unique. So my advice to everyone at home is to have a go. Just do whatever you want. Either write down the rules as to what you're going to do, or just completely wing it and see what happens. Because either way, it's a really fun experience. And I look forward to hearing in the comments what success stories and what tragedies you have had with your infinity bottles. But for now, that's all from me. I'm going to have to lock these away somewhere, so I'm not tempted. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.